Choosing the right plant for the garden can often be the hardest decision a home gardener has to make. Quite often it's all about look. Does it look nice? Does it flower nice? Does it attract the birds? What function will it do? But the garden designer has to make other decisions. Is it right for the soil? Is it right for the climate? Does it fit with the space? Has it a function? Will it produce a sense of place for that particular garden? Selecting a plant is not necessarily just about looks. It's not like a social media app. It is all about trying to select what will best produce the desired effect. So for example, this gardenia in the background, it's often sold as a small plant in a small pot, and it's often regarded to prune it as a small shrub to keep it contained. But I've let it grow to its full potential. It's around about 2.5 to 3 meters high, about 3 meters wide, and is the perfect example of letting a plant do its wild thing and becoming its natural shape. It is in effect a fairly tall shrub or a small tree, and would make a perfect alternative for a courtyard when they're looking for a small tree feature. Other plants we find in the garden centre are also a little bit, specific in what they say on the label, and we have to be a little bit more experimental in how we want to use them. For example, herbs like turmeric and other things. Although we often regard them as just edible crop, we can use them in the landscape to make more of an aesthetic rather than just purely functional. And yes, you can then walk around and harvest those particular plants for productivity. A good example I use at my place is basil. So I don't plant it in a veggie patch, I plant it in the garden to attract the bees throughout the yard so that it has a more appealing effect to it. And I think it extends its function beyond just a pretty herb that's used in the veggie patch. But other plants, when we buy them, we have to consider what we want to do with them. Another good example is Hoya. Most people plant Hoya purely just in a hanging basket and keep it to that function and nothing else. Why not use it as a ground cover? This is what happens in nature. You see it growing along the ground underneath the trees and it forms a mat. So why not use that as a ground cover as well? If you try to look at nature, mimic those effects, you can actually increase what potential you can do in your garden with those particular plants. And you'll get so much more interest in your garden than just the normal things that other people do with those plants. Yes, I grow Hoyas in hanging baskets, but why not also use it as a ground cover? In fact, I've got some growing in some of my yard as a ground cover, and that's where I take my cuttings from. So you can be a little bit more experimental if you wish. And I like to grow all my alocasias in pots. That way I can bring them indoors, all the different patterns that I have. But I will be potting them in the garden, planting them in the garden, so I can experience the beauty that they have for me to enjoy. Likewise in my garden, Bronxfeld Brugmansias, Angel's Trumpets. Pentas, which I have to say has actually gone ballistic. Let me see if I can scroll that down. Where is it? Yeah, it's popped up in the walkway. So I'm going to have to propagate this plant, dig it out, and plant it somewhere else. The thing about gardening is that some plants work and some plants don't. You have the opportunity to dig them out and move them around. And that is really the benefit we have as gardeners, is we learn through experience. Sometimes failure, sometimes successes. But we shouldn't cut ourselves off just because we have failed once. Give ourselves the flexibility to experiment, and you will be surprised what actually works. Sometimes it's limited by climate, sometimes by soil. But the things that we as garden designers and as gardeners, what we do is we do choose plants based on beauty or based on the function that we think that they have. Push the limits, be a little bit more experimental, but enjoy your garden while you're doing it. And with that, that's the end of this little quick little video for today. And this is Paul Plant Horticulture bringing you some information, garden tips, hopefully daily.